But the guy who's writing it did a really good miniseries about Black Bolt that was really solid. So I kind of piqued my interest. She's a fun character, not to be confused with Captain Marvel, who just had a movie. But jumping back here, yeah, that's a lot of red, but it's only in her name and in her costume. It's nowhere else, so that kind of helps to draw the eye to her, because it's really the only occurrence of that, and it's, again, a very bold color. I have no idea who this is. I don't even know if this is a real character or not. I guess there's a Transformer. Not even like a regular Transformer. It's some kind of UK Transformers thing. The composition here is nice too. It does a very effective job of funneling the eye toward the figure in the foreground. Now, the only thing I don't love here is the line on the car here. Yeah, we've got a line here which is really similar to this line, which is not fantastic, but not that big a deal. But you can see here, 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 all of this is effectively helping to draw the eye in this direction. So we're obviously going to be paying attention to this area, and then we have a bunch of open space here, so we're going to naturally want to push it down here to see what's going on. And the fact that she is contrasted against these, I think, is effective as well. But it's a well-arranged page. And the other interesting thing about this that I noticed was that the interaction of the characters is interesting here as well, because you have her basically acting as a shape here, but you also have him acting as a triangle here. So there's an interesting effect as our eye wants to read this anyway. So having these characters arranged on top of each other like this in sort of a triangular fashion, I think is also an interesting way to tie the two together visually. But all in all, it's a good page that shows a lot of fairly subtle work being put into it. In panel 3, she is shrinking out of her enemy's sight. I think that one might actually kind of be on the colorist, though, because they did that gimmick where you make the characters leading up to the last one lighter in order to try to establish a sense of motion. But the problem is that they went so light that I don't think it reads, and it looks like she's turning invisible or something. So yeah, you can already see that it's, I think, reading more clearly. Yeah, so this looks like it's just 100% a coloring thing. And it's made doubly confusing by the fact that the boots are done white in the first one. Actually, I guess it was both of them, right? So that, I think, kind of makes things a bit weird. Yeah, well, I have seen examples of this working, but I think, yeah, this is actually blue, but it's just that the colors are pushed so far down that it doesn't really create the effect of a ghost so much as it just makes it look like a different character. And I mean, this is, of course, one of those classic problems with comics, which is, how do you show multiple things happening at the same time? I'm a little bit frustrated with the last panel because she's obviously back to big mode, but she doesn't really read as that big. This is kind of another classic issue with comics. I think the panel before it sells it well, but he is going to appear larger, which is going to ruin the effect of her being giant. And in fact, actually, I think that's why the panel looks a little bit wonky here. But yeah, this is something that I see happening all the time with big characters. It's really tricky to sell well. There's a very much an art to it, and a lot of it comes down to playing with perspective and stuff like that. Let's see if I can find an example. The guy who I always was really impressed by, who could do that well, is Brian Hitch. And even he had some issues every now and then. And I think one of the reasons why this is a bit stronger is because he's got a couple things going on here. Not the least of which is he's using the birds to try to sell to the reader the size of the character, but he's also very judicious in his arrangement, so the foreground characters are just completely dwarfed by him because of how the camera is working as well. Alright, now let's go ahead and get Kamala here, and let's throw in the dumpster for good measure. No idea where the dumpster begins or ends, so I'm just going to have to kind of freestyle and probably something like that. And I don't really understand what's going on with this foot or leg, but she's, I guess, a stretcher, so I'm not going to worry about it right now. Well, I think he's supposed to be a goofy guy, so I'm not going to come down on the costume too hard. His name is Deathbringer, and he's got a skull on his face and an Uzi and a sword, so I'm pretty sure he's supposed to be one of those comedy guys. So if we look at just the outlines of the character, I think this kind of emphasizes where the issue is, because the Miss Marvel pose actually does a little bit to help sell the size and the stretchiness. But again, one of the issues that comes up with a character like this is that it tends to have a really nasty effect on a lot of the perspective stuff. So you tend to see some exaggeration of the form for foreshortening and whatnot. But at the end of the day, these characters are the same size, as you can see, more or less, if you just look at their silhouette. So that is kind of a problem. And one solution to that would be to change the size of this guy. But the problem is that doesn't actually solve your problem. I think what you would actually want to do is go the other way and make him smaller. And this is interesting because it's actually less dramatic, but I think it helps to emphasize that he's, getting his butt kicked here. Deathbringer yields. I like Deathbringer. Best new character 2019. One of the things that I think the colorist is doing well is muting the colors of things that aren't relevant. So they do a really good job of telling you, hey, you should pay attention to this. So the store owner is in green, but most of the background is blue and purple. Miss Marvel obviously has her very vibrant superhero colors, and that even continues into the last panel where the background characters are similarly colored. And there's maybe a bit of perfunctory red for the sign, but other than that, it helps to sell, hey, you should be looking at this. I'm used to adding 30 minutes for brown people time. Whoa! Like, it's busy when you're an international role model. I understand you don't have time for the little people. Ha ha ha. Let's take a walk, huh? I have mixed feelings about this character. This is going for snark, but it's reading a little bit more mean. But if I remember this character correctly, I think she's always been kind of a grouch. I'm noticing that Miss Marvel is in yellow in her civilian outfit, and the shop is also mostly yellow, which I don't know if I love. But it kind of gives it an effect almost like color grading does in movies. But that's one of those things that's, I think, a little bit tricky when you're doing a comic, because there are all these little rules and ideas and theories and approaches, but sometimes they can actually contradict each other. You run into situations where there's not necessarily a great solution. Because if you pick something other than yellow for Miss Marvel, then you have to start thinking about, like, well, green's not going to be great because it clashes too much, and the chairs are already red, and those go well with the environment, so they look like they belong there, so you don't want to do red necessarily, and the blue would be just kind of boring and generic, and you have the background characters already wearing blue, and, I mean, thematically, you can even maybe make the argument that that's a good choice for a color just because, you know, she's in her civilian uniform, so she doesn't necessarily want to stand out that much anyway. I think for the most part on this page, the artist is trying to convey what she is focusing on. So even in the first one, you know, a lot of attention is being paid to the shop that she's running toward. So there's a lot of subtle choices being made here that I think help to give you a sense of what she's interested in and what she's paying attention to. Yes, Kamala, I know about your double life, about Miss Marvel. Oh boy, that's not great. It's interesting. I kind of thought that they might be trying to push a swerve here. And we have the infamous 9-panel, which I believe is the first appearance of that. Yeah. And probably not a bad choice since we're going to be focusing on character interaction. But I really love the expression in panel 6. I feel like that sells it really well. There's a lot of complicated emotional stuff going there. Like she's making a decision. We have sorrow in the first panel, anger in the second, returned anger in the third, continued anger in the fourth, more anger in the fifth, but then there's some hesitation, and then shifting to resolve, and then pleading, recognition of pleading, and then turning to frustration from the father, and more, I guess, continued pleading, trying to make a play for understanding from Kamala. So there's a whole journey here. Although I do find it very strange that, see, this is one of those things that like weird families do that I was never really exposed to, but the idea that people just sit in the dark waiting for people to come home so they can yell at them. Like, I know that's a thing that happens, but it's never happened to me, so it feels kind of weird. Whoa, that is a legit monster. It's a pretty good wolf monster, I have to say. He comes off as both wolf and monster. The character is very goofy, but I find it kind of charming. Kind of like Deathbringer, actually. Just obnoxious, but in a self-aware way. I don't know about the color on him. He reads, I don't know if he's supposed to be like teal or not. And another really fun, goofy design on the monster. Something about animals and armor is always adorable. And this big panel here is interesting to me because I assume that is probably New York on the other side. And it is fairly perfunctory and sketched in, but it feels very, big city-ish, which is difficult to execute well. And obviously, if you're going to do a super accurate version of New York, a page like this would probably take you quite a while. But I think the artist effectively manages to sell, hey, big city over here, don't worry about it, it's in the background. Because naturally our attention is more being drawn toward the armored bird and the response to that. And it's the return of the Ghost Miss Marvels. Again, not loving it, but I think it looks like the second one is closer to the original colors here, so that's reading better than last time. Yeah, the only thing I don't like about this is this is a weird pet peeve of mine, but I've never really liked it when shapeshifters can shapeshift clothing. And I know that this is a super standard trope that everybody does. They did this in the Captain Marvel movie, and they do this with Mystique and the X-Men and so on and so forth, but it's never made any sense to me. And it's one of those things that like 100% doesn't matter because it's not like you can make any sense of shapeshifting anyway, but the idea that you could wear armor that would turn into goop is not necessarily any more absurd than a bird monster you could turn into goop. But for whatever reason, I accept the bird monster goop and I don't like the armor goop. But again, this is my own thing. I should probably talk to a therapist about it. I like the squishing though. That looks very brutal. Flame, read rituals. Yeah. Well, I mean, even there though, you're you're changing the shape of it, but you're not. Yeah, I'm being misprecise. I think you're not. The issue that I have isn't the fact that you're like stretching it or squishing it. It's the issue of how are they managing to change color and texture and create like the illusion of metal. That doesn't make any sense to me. Like stretching clothes, I think I can live with, but clothes turning into goop is no thank you. Also, Spider-Man's costume. That was, yeah. If you want a goopy monster costume, okay, but it can't turn into civilian clothes. That doesn't make any sense. But before I start writing manifestos. I got that. So, yeah, they turned out to be goopers. Goop, goop. I hate it when this happens. It's the worst. Yep, you were right. Well played. Okay, so he's wearing that. Stripey guy. Oh yeah, this is a nice touch. They're actually wearing different clothes from the previous appearance, which is kind of like a subtle indication that there's a problem there. This is what I wanted to see. Yeah, this is the good stuff. Check this out. We got some pencils. Oh, and inks. All right. Now we're cooking. Oh, that's interesting because I was very curious about what this hatching effect was, and it looks like it's something that was pretty much introduced entirely by the inker. I would not have expected that. No, he's a solid artist for sure. But I love doing stuff like this. Being able to see the difference and the transformation of the page. I don't know if I'm necessarily a big fan of the inking on this, though, now that I can see the original pencils. Like, I think this is a good inker. I don't know if they're necessarily meshing with this artist particularly well. Like, I feel like the inker for this is somebody who probably does less cartoony ink, and I feel like maybe thicker lines and more simplified forms might do it some favors. But like here, he's actually added some hatching to her hair in panel, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. That I don't think I don't think I love. Yeah, this is striking. I would not have expected this to be the thing that gave me pause, but I feel like there's a softness and a sort of thickness in the pencils that is being lost in the transition here. Not completely, but like I said, this is good inking, but I do find it a little bit frustrating. Interesting. I'm always fascinated when artists will fill in things with pencil, even though they don't need to, like her hair in panel 5 and the chair in panel 3 are both penciled in with black, even though they don't need to be, because you can just exit to indicate that. But, and I think part of it is just mentally it's easier to tell for the penciler if they can see what has been done there. Hey, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to swing by my Twitch channel sometime where I'm doing these videos regularly. If you have any suggestions for something you'd like to see me review, you can either get in touch with me on Twitter or you can leave a message in my Discord. I'm hanging out there all the time now, so it'd be great to see you. Bye. Crushed it. I should not include that in the recording, but that was a very good recording.